All right. Number one word to describe Russia prior to Peter the Great. Primitive. All right, that's good. Why would you say primitive?
They didn't have access to the ocean and they weren't very modern.
Okay, then they weren't very modern in comparison to their Western European counterparts, right? That's good. What else about their culture kind of gives you an idea of primitive? They were mostly a what type of culture? They're based off of, and there's more than hunting and gathering. That's the next step. What's after hunting and gathering? They develop what? Agriculture does that, yeah. Agriculture, right? But what was it so primitive about their agriculture? They had a system in place in which they could not come up with any type of innovations and advancements, right? With agriculture, they were kind of like stuck, based off of serfdom and peasantry, right? So that lack of innovation led to a lack of progress there. What other words do we have to describe Russia prior to?
Ideal.
Was that?
Like almost ideal.
What do you mean ideal? Ideal means like perfect.
In the way I took it, it doesn't mean like kind of homemade.
Homemade?
Like you don't have a lot of machinery. So you
Okay, all right. So I'd probably choose a different word than ideal. Homemade, maybe just homemade in itself. It's subsistence, something like that. Subsistent, maybe. We got another word to describe. One more. Describe Russia before Peter the Great. Ms. Phillips. Poor. Yeah, poor is a good one, right? What about one word to describe Russia after Peter the Great? Ms. Knapp? Civilized, all right, in the sense of the English Rudyard Kipling civilized, all right. Mr. Brogy? Modern, it's good. He tried to bring the educational system that they had in Western Europe, bring that over to Russia. Mr. Leppinger? Advanced, right, because they progressed from serfdom and peasantry to another level of culture, right, where you can focus on literature, you can focus on art, innovation, science, mathematics, and trade, right? So those are all good things that Peter the Great brought. Now, was he infallible? Was he exempt from doing anything wrong? Right? He kind of ruled with a sense of terror at the same time, right? At times he was pretty harsh. Didn't he kill his own son? Was that in the video? His son actually tried to circumvent him and remove him from power, and so he had him killed that way as well. So he's a little bit harsh, but he did bring Western culture to Russia, so that's the connection. Yep.
Is there any way that an American can become like the president of Russia?
Of like another country?
Yeah.
It depends upon their constitution, what their constitution says. Right, so our Constitution says that you have to be born here in the United States in order to be have an opportunity to become the president. Yeah. So other constitutions may vary. Right. All right. Last question. What's a sextant? You looked that up. What is that? Ms. Knoll?
Like, a mechanism that like measures distances.
And in what context would you use a sextant?
Navigation.
And navigation, right? So this is a instrument that is symbolic of the westernization of Russia with Peter the Great. Remember, we got that? So this is a tool that he would introduce back to Russian culture, to try to teach them about navigation, right? So what was one of his goals? His goal is to gain access to warm water ports so that he can increase the amount of interaction and shipping and trade with the rest of the world, specifically the Western world, right? Did it go into detail on the video on Peter the Great of some of the extreme things that he did? Like they had a beard tax. He implemented a beard tax. They talk about that? Yeah. So he wanted to make sure that they looked more European. They encouraged them to dress more European as well. So some interesting things that he started to implement there. All right, let's go ahead and change modes. I encourage you to take out a sheet of notebook paper and take our notes that way. Take our notes today on Russia. Sound good? So Chromebooks down, please.
If we're taking notes, we can Chromebook, so.
I'd rather you not. I'd rather paper pencil. Alright.
I'm just checking my.
Research suggests that paper pencil is the way to go when it comes to increasing our long-term memory, increasing our comprehension. Okay? So again, there are some blanks in our notes today, and I'll try to fill them in as we go. We're going to start off with a couple political cartoons, kind of like what we did the other day. We were talking about the European Union. Okay? This is more Russia today. Okay? Russia's represented by the bear here. What is this political cartoonist implying here in this particular case? Ms. Britton?
Russia wants to get into the Cold War.
Say it again.
Russia wants to get into the Cold War.
Okay, get into the Cold War, or where's the Cold War here? It's dead, right? It's buried, and what does Russia want to do? It wants to
Reunite it.
yes, right? Dig it back up. So this is really from a couple years ago. You remember I mentioned to another class, maybe it wasn't yours, but Crimea is a section of the Ukraine where a few years ago Vladimir Putin just took his armed forces and just marched into the area and said, hey, this isn't part of the Ukraine anymore, it's part of Russia now. Right? It sounds very similar to setting up these Soviet satellites from the old Soviet Union. Cold War era-esque type of stuff. Okay? So it kind of reiterates that. And notice it's at night, right? So what does that mean? What does that imply that it's at night? They're trying to hide it. They're trying to be deceptive so that nobody knows, right? That they're trying to dig up this Cold War era-esque type of mentality. Okay. Remember, the Cold War was time period post World War II up to about the 1990s. It's called Cold War because there's no what? There's no actual fighting, right? And the Cold War was between who and who? Russia and us, the United States, right? For the most part, I mean, the Western European countries would side on our side, right? They're associated with the Cold War. All right, so this one's a little bit dated for a couple years ago, but what does this political cartoon imply? What does it imply? It's kind of interesting that we see this now that the Mueller report has come out recently. Yeah?
They were using Facebook to influence the 2016 election.
Exactly, right? They're meddling with political affairs here in the United States by using Facebook accounts to influence the American voting system or the American voter. Okay, and of course, who's this guy? Vladimir Putin. Right, so he's their fearless leader today, Relotsky. Like the idea there. Okay. All right, historians thinking about going away from current context. We think about history and culture of Russia, or an overview. Some historians have described Russia in a particular way, a riddle wrapped inside of a mystery, inside of an enigma. All right. First off, the guy that said this was Winston Churchill. Churchill is not an American. He's from where? Great Britain, right? He's a former prime minister of Great Britain during World War II. Kind of like Theresa May's position that we talked about the other day. So he's saying this about Russia, and what is he implying here? It's Russia is a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside of an enigma. He's saying that Russia is.
I forget what it was.
They are what?
Complicated nation.
Yes, it's a complicated nation. It's difficult to figure out. Riddles are tough to solve, right? Mysteries are tough to solve. And then you wrap all that stuff inside of an enigma. What is an enigma? It's like a riddle. It's like a mystery. So it's very difficult to understand the Russian culture, right? So a land shrouded in mystery. It is shrouded in secrecy. We know Vladimir Putin here, right? Does anybody know the clandestine agency that's associated with the Cold War era-esque type of stuff? Anybody know what it's called? We have the CIA. That's our, foreign agency that we have to monitor, do some espionage, and make sure that we protect American interests in foreign soil. What was what's the acronym for the Russian agency? You know what that is? Maybe you've heard it in movies before. Yep.
It'd be the KGB.
The KGB. Right? Do you know who Vladimir Putin worked for before he joined the political system in Russia? He was a KGB officer, right? Before he got into the political system. So, and he was in the KGB during the Cold War era. So you can understand why some people here in the United States are fearful of this reuniting, reignition of Cold War era type of stuff. Okay, so that's KGB. Think of secrecy there. Okay, or secrecy. Think of KGB. Got some authoritarian rule. That goes all the way back to like the Russian czars. You know, you go Ivan the Terrible, and his family was the development of this czarist type of system. Goes all the way through Peter the Great. You get all the way up to the beginning of the 20th century, and then they start to transition towards a communist type of state. And even in that type of environment, you have guys like Lenin and Gorbachev, and now Putin, right, where they still maintain a very strong authoritarian type of rule. Okay? It covers Russia, 1/6 of the Earth's landmass. Of all the Earth's landmass that's out there, 1/6 of it's in Russia. It's huge, massive. They have 250 million people. 250 million people. So that's 250 million. And they have 150 different nationalities. Okay? We do a study in my sociology class where we pick out foreign cultures and we try to identify their social norms and then compare them to our social norms here in the United States. And some of the students say, hey, I want to do the Russian culture. And I say, well, the Russian culture is a little bit more complex than what you make it out to be. Right? There's 150 different cultures or nationalities inside of what we identify as the Russian culture. Okay? It's a little bit more complex than that. Okay? The physical geography, more than just having 1/6 of the Earth's landmass, have various different types of climates because of how large it is. I know that this isn't on our notes here, but they have tundras in the north. They have plains, the central portions. They have mountains. They have deserts. They have large forests as well. So various different types of climates. It is 6,000 miles from east to west. So extremely expansive from east to west. You know, the United States maybe 2,500, 3,000 miles from east to west. So, and it is 3,000 miles from north to south. So it is almost as far north to south as we are from east to west. It's the same size as the United States, Canada, and Mexico combined. And if you want to think about that for a second, you have world rankings based upon land area for size of countries. Russia's number 1, right? United States and Canada, I believe, Canada's number 2. I believe the United States is either number 3 or number 4. Okay? So you've got like number 2 plus number 3. Add them up together, they still don't make up the size of Russia. Russia is massive. Okay? It is massive. You have some extreme temperatures. You have extreme cold in Siberia. They've had recorded temperatures in Siberia as low as negative 90 degrees. And we thought it was cold this past winter, right? When they told us all not to go outside at all. You guys remember that?
No.
Just a month or so ago, a couple months ago. What was that, negative 30 degrees? What was it?
Negative 22.
Our meteorologist,
Oh,
negative
that's
22.
good, though.
That was as low as it got, was negative 22?
The real feel was like negative 50.
Okay, the real feel, yeah, because, you know, got to take in consideration wind chill factor, right? So, really, really cold. Negative 90 here.
Wow,
That's nuts. They've also got extreme heat and hot. And we don't think about that with Russia all that often. We just think, you know, Siberia, cold, gulags. The Central Asian deserts have had temperatures of up to 130 degrees Fahrenheit. Severe climate makes it difficult to live in Russia. Some say the climate causes severe moodiness. there's this stereotype of Russian people of having this really moody type of character in behavior. And some people attribute that to the weather. There was a stat that I came across a year or two ago when we used it in our word of the day. They were calculating the days in which the sun, or not the days, the amount of time in minutes the sun was out in Moscow for like the past 6 months. And it was over the winter time era, from like October to about now. They had 30 minutes. 30 minutes of sun for that entire time in Moscow. It's crazy. I think I'd go nuts if I only saw the sun for 30 minutes over the course of the 6 months window. Okay? All right, a little bit of history in Russia. We saw this a little bit with our videos that you watched yesterday. Kiev in Russia in the 10th century. Kiev was a powerful city-state in the Ukraine and influenced the Russian region. Okay? So you've got Ukraine on the map here. I believe Ukraine was a part of your map quiz the other day, correct? Right? So it's interesting to see that Russian history actually has to start not even in Russia, but over closer to Europe, towards the Ukraine. Right? However, Mongol hordes, they conquered Kiev, and they kind of pushed a lot of the population that was in Kiev north and northwest so that they could stay away from the Mongolians. Nobody really liked them all that much. And so they headed up towards what is now Moscow. Okay. Ivan III defeated the Mongols in 1480. He, I believe, established a relationship with them. It was a relationship as in, hey, you guys stay over there, we'll stay over here, and we won't bother each other. You can go bother somebody else, other Western European cultures then. Okay? Ivan IV, also known as Ivan the Terrible, pushed the Mongols west to Siberia, and he was considered to be the first Russian Tsar. So you may write Tsar out to the side of Ivan IV. Again, Ivan the Terrible is the one that was highlighted in the video yesterday, known as the Russian Tsar. You guys have heard of the Russian Tsars before, correct? Russian Tsar is kind of like, it's a person of authoritarian rule. It's like a Russian king is what it is. It's seen like a nobility, and you have succession through heredity, meaning that your son would be the next Russian Tsar. It go passed down. So it's like the European monarchs is what it is. Okay, but they have a different title for it. Russian expansion, that last point there. Thereafter, Russia expanded both west and east in an attempt to unite all the Slavic nations. Ironically, the Russians at this point in time, they used the church, the Russian church, as a means for unification, unifying all the Slavic nations. Which I say is ironic because during the Cold War era, it's kind of quite the opposite of trying to get rid of aspects of Christianity in Russia. During the 19th century, that would be the 1800s, Russia developed an inferiority complex when they were comparing themselves to Europe. They looked at Europe in envy. So they thought, they see Europe, they compare themselves to it, and they said, we're just not, measuring up to their standards. They have too many advantages, or so many more advantages than what we have, and they wanted some of those things. Okay, the reasons for this inferiority, some of them, the Russians said that they were too much like Europe because of Peter the Great's reforms, right? And that's what led to their deficiencies. And others said, hey, we're not enough like Europe. We need to be more like Western Europe. And so they were kind of split on that. So in the 1800s, reforms were made, railroads were built, serfdom was abolished. However, the reforms were not enough for them to catch up with the rest of Western Europe. Sound good? So they tried to make some changes to help society progress, to become more modernized, just like Peter did 100 years or so ago before this. But again, the changes were not enough. So what did they turn to at the beginning of the 20th century? You might know. Seth Galloway would know. Yes? Communism. Right? They turned to the Soviet era. In 1917, rioting erupts in St. Petersburg. You remember St. Petersburg is the crown jewel of Peter the Great. He built that city to try to symbolize the advancement in culture of Russian culture. So he gets all these artists and architects and stuff. It's a very impressive city. Mr. Sanford lives on the other side of the lake, former teacher here at Eureka. He's been to St. Petersburg. He says it's one of the most beautiful cities he's been to, and he's traveled a lot, right? One of the most impressive cities that he's been to, okay? But rioting erupts there in 1917, forces Tsar Nicholas to abdicate the throne, okay? You may write Tsar Nicholas down. Nicholas, Nicholas. Anybody know the story about Tsar Nicholas? The last of the Russian czars in the Russian Revolution? So if they're going to have this new political system here, they can't just kick the czar out and say, hey, you're no longer going to do your former duties. We're going to have this new political system come in. We're going to implement aspects of Marxism. And you can just stay off to the side. They can't do that because there would always be a constant threat of what? Yeah, and that he could return to power. So what did they have to do?
Kill him.
They had to kill him, and not only did they have to kill him, they had to kill his entire family. Because if there's any link between him and one of his family members left over, then they could say, hey, I have a right to rule because of my ancestry, right? So they pretty much, in one night, kill him, his family. However, there's some suspicion that one of the young girls escaped. Does anybody know what her name was? What is it?
Was it Zipporah?
No, not Zipporah. Not this time. Not this time. Her name was Anastasia. Remember, write Anastasia down. If you haven't seen the Disney or know about Anastasia, maybe watch the Disney cartoon version of Anastasia. It's probably not completely historically accurate, but you get a general overview of the idea. Is that she escaped, and then there's a thought that she disappeared for a while, and then she reappeared in Europe like 20, 25 years later, right? And so she says that, hey, I'm Tsar Nicholas II's daughter, and I have a right, to rule, and I have a right to a lot of power back in Russia, or at least a lot of money that way as well. So it creates this whole controversy. So she's never ever able to regain anything. If she happened to be the person that she said she was. Okay? So get rid of Tsar Nicholas II, right? He's the last of the Russian czars. Eventually, Vladimir Lenin, this guy, Vladimir Lenin, you can write Lenin down, Lenin. He takes power. Okay? Now, Lenin is representing a particular political party, and they're called the Bolsheviks. This is where it gets a little bit difficult with the Russian terminology. Bolsheviks, that's Bolsheviks. Bolsheviks. Again, Bolsheviks is like a political party. These are the people that want to change things in Russia and bring on this sense of communism, right? Or Marxism is what they really termed it, okay? So the time period, again, it's 1917, so there's a big world war going on, and Russia's in the midst of it, and once Lenin takes power, his first decision, get the Russians out of World War I, all right? So he removes them from that particular scene, okay? You may want to write out to the side. We'll get to it actually a little bit. Let's wait then, if we're going to get to it in a little bit. Vladimir Lenin, let me see here, tries to rebuild Russia from the ideas of this guy. His name is Karl Marx. Okay? You may write Karl Marx down. So Lenin's been doing a lot of reading, a lot of study. This guy named Karl Marx, he's actually a Western European. He's been writing some text out there that have really changed up some ideas on how society should be run and governed and how social structure should be. And he's got a text, it's called the Communist Manifesto. I'm going to write that out to the side. The Communist Manifesto. So, what is written and the ideas that are written down in the Communist Manifesto are now termed Marxism. Okay, Marxism, because it comes from Karl Marx. Sound good? So what exactly is in the Communist Manifesto that is so, revolutionary, that changes things up, that, the world hadn't seen this stuff before? Well, according to Karl Marx, he believed that society could be broken down into two different groups, or two different classes. You need to make sure that you write these two classes down. I'm not sure if I got them up here. No, I don't. Okay? I probably should add a slide here. So these two classes, that Marx says, all societies are broken down into these two different groups, at least Western Europe at that point in time. And this would include Russia, because of some of the changes that they made. So you have really rich people, and you have poor people. Okay? I'm going to simplify it a little bit. You have rich people, which is a really small group of people. There's not very many of them, but they're really rich. And then there's poor people, and there's a lot of them. Okay? Now, to the side of the rich people, I want you to write a name, because this is the terminology that Karl Marx used for the rich people. He called them the bourgeois, or the bourgeoisie. It's a French word that means elite upper class. Okay? Bourgeoisie is spelled B. Let me spell it here, because I know that's not right. It is Bourgeoisie. Bourgeoisie. Everybody say bourgeoisie.
Bourgeoisie.
All right, so it's a French word, and sometimes it is simplified they shorten it up by saying bourgeois, right? Or sometimes in the American cultural system, people will use it in a negative term, meaning that that person, they're being bougie, right? They're saying that they're trying to portray themselves as being wealthier than they actually are, right? That they're putting on this fake appearance that they're being bougie. They're just better than everybody else, okay? So bourgeois or bourgeoisie. The other name that Marx has for the poor, this is really the working class. This is everybody else that's working. That would be the proletariat. Proletariat. It's Proletariat. Proletariat. Okay? So you remember we did a study on industrialization, right? We said industrialization started in England in the 1700s, and then it spread throughout Western Europe. It spread to the United States because of Slater the Trader, right? Famous Slater. Well, it spread to Russia as well. So they have industry, they have factories, and these people that are working in these factories are pretty much the proletariat. The people that own the factories are the bourgeoisie. Sound good? So the bourgeois, they don't have to work all that hard, but of all the profits, they get the majority of the profits, right? The majority of the money. The proletariat, there's a lot of them. They have to work hard, long hours, and how much money do they get? They don't get much money at all, right? So it's a constant cycle, right? These proletariat families, can they ever, flip it and all of a sudden become bourgeoisie? No, they never make enough money to get out of that system. They can't build it up. So when Karl Marx comes along, he says, these proletariat families, they're going to become aware of what's going on. And eventually they're going to get upset with the social structure that they're born into. And they're going to say, we've had it, right? And they're going to lead to a revolution because this class type of society that they're born into, they don't like it. They're going to create a revolution that creates a classless type of society. So Marxism is about the proletariat overthrowing the bourgeoisie. Everybody got that? There's more proletariat than there are bourgeoisie. So Marx is saying, well, they unite and get themselves together, then because of the large number that they have, then they can create social change. Okay? So you go back to Lenin and the Bolsheviks, that's what the Bolsheviks are all about. The Bolsheviks are all about spreading this idea of Marxism, getting everybody, all the proletariat together to overthrow the bourgeoisie, create a classless type of society where you don't have some people that get a lot of money don't work all that much. And then you have a lot of people that don't get much money and they work a heck of a lot. Okay? So a civil war breaks out. Alright? This is part of that Russian Revolution. So you have the Bolsheviks on the one side that want Marxism. They want this Soviet Revolution. And then on the other side are really the traditionalists, the nationalists, that they probably want something else. They want something different from the Tsar's rule, maybe. Maybe some of them do want to maintain the Tsar's rule, the traditional aspects. But they're called the Mensheviks. Right? The Mensheviks. So who do you think wins in this Russian Revolution? The Bolsheviks or the Mensheviks? The Bolsheviks. Yeah, leads up to the Soviet area. So they are able to implement communism there. Okay? So the Bolsheviks defeat the Mensheviks there. Okay? However, after the Civil War, their fearless leader, Lenin, he dies. So that kind of creates some problems. He's the guy that's really implementing all these changes. So who's going to take over next? So this guy named Stalin actually takes over. So Stalin takes over, and that's really leading up to World War II with Stalin. And when Stalin took over, there was a lot of people that were still, remnants of the Mensheviks, that were still not on board with this Marxist ideology and this implementation of communism. And so he would have people trying to undermine his authority. So what he did to try to squash those people from undermining his authority is he created the gulags. You guys ever heard of the gulags before? These are these like Siberian work camps where you would be forced to go off to these work camps in Siberia, and the likelihood of you surviving them was very minimal. Very minimal. But that was a way to squash the rebellion against Stalin there. And, that stuff is going on during World War II. And what is our mindset on in World War II? It's about things going on in Europe, right? Or Japan. We uncover the aspects of the Holocaust, and we're overwhelmed by that. But at the same time, Stalin is sending tons and tons of people. We say 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust, right? There's been some estimates that between 20 and 40 million Russian citizens were sent to the gulags at some point in time. Think about the difference in numbers there. 6 million versus 20 million, okay? So Stalin leads Russia pretty much for a large portion into the Cold War. The Soviets, during the Cold War, at least at the end, towards the 1980s, have problems with economic growth. And then eventually, because of their inability to keep up with our capitalistic system and our economic growth here in the United States, a lot of it is we just outspent them on a lot of these innovations in technology and weaponry and space, the space age. We pretty much forced their economy to collapse, and consequently communism fell apart in the late 1980s, early 1990s. We want to put a president that we think a lot of that kind of contributed to the fall of communism. Who would that be? No, Reagan. Yeah, Ronald Reagan. So he's the guy that we attribute to saying, hey, he beat the communists, right? He beat the Soviet Union. He led to the downfall because of all of the programs that he was implementing there. Okay? All right. Does anybody have any questions about our content before we finish up today? Nope.